Gavin and Jeremy. You guys were responsible for post, but your work did not start in post. It started at the very beginning of the picture. And please talk about that.
That's right. Let me just try to pull this up here. You've heard the expression, let's fix it in post. Anybody? Anybody? Okay, guys, let's not do that, okay? We want to try to explain the workflow for Untitled in great detail so that you guys can get an idea of how we kind of solve these problems that always come up in every film. This process, doing your workflow, starts in pre-production, not after the fact. So you want to bring your post-production facility in when you are planning your film. Now, why do you guys need a workflow design? There's a lot of problems that you guys run into. I mean, a lot of times what happens is a DP decides that they want to use a particular camera, and so the whole production is built around that. I mean, that can work sometimes, but you really need to know what the pitfalls are in the chosen format. Some of those pitfalls are the technology that you're using. As far as new technology goes, this may not always be the latest and greatest is right for you, but if you don't really know what's out there, could be missing something. Also, some new technology can even enhance some of your old workflow. That's something to look out for. Multiple frame rates. Please don't do that. Okay, you want specific, conversion techniques. Depending on which format you guys decide on using, this can be a really, really big deal. Whether or not it has to be debared or whatever the case, you really need to know about the format that you choose. Incompatibilities. A lot of different hardware manufacturers have their own standards, and so they don't always talk to each other, so that is something else. But these are only a few things that can come up. I mean, there's a ton of stuff. If you have a specific document, an actual document that tells you how am I going to get from A to B to C to D, you can actually save a lot of time and money and a lot of sanity in your post-production house. The chosen format for Untitled was HDCAM SR format because it's virtually uncompressed. Okay, this allows for 50 minutes of continuous runtime per tape at 24 frames per second. 48 hours of raw footage was recorded with 58 tapes at full bandwidth. And the tape stock running at $68 a tape will come out to about $4,000. That is a big, huge savings from film. What this allowed Jonathan and Svetlana to do is to do longer takes, like they had said, especially for the musical improvisations. And as directors, everybody knows that the more freedom you have, obviously, the better your takes will be. So automatically, what we had was an archival format here. This becomes your digital negative. Other than the storage area network, or SAN, which we were editing on, we purchased a series of FireWire drives to back up the HD editorial dailies, cuts, project files, audio files. Pretty much anything that had to do with the project was backed up on these FireWire drives and then backed up again. What this allowed us to do is to touch these digital negatives only twice. Once for the original ingest, and then a second time for the digital intermediate. Now, to get more specific into this process, I'm going to ask Gavin Rosenberg to come up here because he's our workflow design.
Thanks, Jeremy. Probably the best place to come from is a film workflow, in the sense of, let's take film and the telecine world that I think everybody is quite familiar with. In film, we have telecine and film scanners. This allows us to deal flexibility for all of our deliverables. Converting our footage to various formats can cause image degradation. We have the least compromising quality that we can always go back and start again. Meaning, in the beginning, we can scan once, standard definition, high definition, compress it several formats, get our dailies, editorial material for our screeners. Go again in whatever our budget might meet for the highest end digital scanning, and go back for our conform, our high-end color correction. Okay, let's think of telecine except in a digital world. Let's just call it digital telecine. If we were dealing with just files, sometimes they call it data cine. It's really all the same type of action. To leverage the most out of a digital negative, you really want a format with very little compression to it and have very high color sampling. The higher you start in the image chain, the easier it is to keep the quality higher as we go down. If it's down to DVDs or your Blu-ray, down to web, anything, even through your theatrical release, it makes a big, big difference. So especially choosing a format that keeps that quality very high from the very beginning and is very safe. An HDCam SR is based on a tape workflow. It seems like a very old type of technology. Should we stay on tape? But the real news in the post world is if you're even shooting tapeless these days, you're going back to tape eventually. You're going to put it on some type of data tape, LTO, LTO3, LTO4. It's going to go back to the same process. What was great for us, and the real economy of the format, was the fact that we had an archival master right away, the immediacy of it, and that could sit on the shelf. Like we've all heard before, bring your post facility in earlier. Pre-production is a huge, huge advantage. It seems like maybe it's too early, you don't want to bring in the post facility, we'll flesh out what type of camera solution we have. It really does make a lot of sense to bring us in a little bit earlier. For instance, Untitled had about 14 visual effects. 8 of those were planned for, and about 6 of those just cropped up in production. And we're talking about anything between green screen stuff that was planned for, wire removal, and some signage stuff that was planned, but plenty of stuff like rotoing out a crew and a reflection type of thing that happens in the chaos of shooting during the day. What it gave us an advantage of having very little compression in this format gave us less time, less hours in a post-production visual effects suite, which I think we can all relate to, can add up to a lot of money per hour. One thing, I know we touched on PanaLA before, but I think it's good to see something unaffected, a raw image that the black levels are raised up a bit so they look a little bit milky, and the top end highlights are crushed down a little bit. What it's doing is it's taking as much of the sensor's sensitivity as possible and maintaining it. As we said, it's very important to contend with what is the film going to look like. Not everybody needs to see this. You know, it's a very technical thing. Sitting in Video Village, I want to know that I have everything, that we're good to go, that if we change our look throughout the process, we have the flexibility. This is where the whole lookup table thing comes in. And sometimes it's presented in such a complicated way, and it becomes very technical. But it's really not that technical. Mostly people in the camera department and post-production just say LUTs. And LUTs is just a fancy word for lookup table, meaning a pre-visualization. And this pre-visualization, the greatest part about this process is with this gamma display processor, the Genesis display processor, this little box, you can turn it on and off. You're never married to whatever's on set. But developing an effect, just like Svetlana and Jonathan said, is very influential. You're going to be looking at this editorial material for months and months and months. You're going to screen it in front of an audience. You're not going to color grade the whole film for a screener and then go back again. What I'd like to do is just very quickly go through the basics of how we leveraged the budget on this film for the Untitled workflow. Clearly, we had the Genesis camera. We used the HDCam SR tape stock because of its economy and its very high quality in tape. And it gave us an archival master. The gamma display processor, that's what it looks like. It's really as simple as it looks. There's not that many buttons on it. They've made it very, very simple. Like many films, it's dual system. So we're contending with the audio system, sunk together with timecode, slate, but obviously also clapped together for sync. One big advantage, and it doesn't really seem that big, is that we were shooting in 24p, technically 23976, but we also wanted to run our audio hard disc recorder, doing all our multi-track high-res audio at the same exact frame rate. Typically, they run it at a standard 30 frames per second for standard def post, but we went HD the whole way through the process, which really gave much better decision-making on calling if shots are even in focus. Keeping it HD just kept it as close to the end product as possible all the way through the editorial process. A big part of having dailies and turning dailies around, you're contending with syncing time. What we did is we took a wireless and put it into one of the 2 Genesis channels that you can also record audio to. So right off the back, we had a tape that was already sunk with sound that went back to editorial. So when we brought it into our post-production environment, we had the same gamma display processor, which we grabbed the LUTs from set, which we got from our DIT, which the luxury of it is that they're small enough that you can email. We made sure that everything was tracked according to camera reports, so even if one shot was off and needed a special LUT, we could apply it individually to shots on its way in. In this case, we recorded in what would be considered high-definition audio, 48, 24-bit, which typically gets downsampled as well. We wanted to keep it as high as possible and cost-effective. Because of the budget, we were able to leverage a shared storage network, which allowed us 2 editorial machines to operate simultaneously. And to really see the advantage of that, our assistant editor had ingested the material. He took that material while he was already syncing the multi-track for the editor to edit each day's scenes together. He was making DVD dailies at the same time because we could share the same footage. But he didn't even have to waste any sort of time syncing the sound to them. He already had those with sound ready to go encoded onto DVDs, and was spending more time making more copies. One of the biggest proponents of this was actually using a Final Cut Pro system with third-party hardware. It seems more and more commonplace these days, but one of the biggest things was, especially on a budget, we had 2 full-blown machines, and we were actually able to complete the digital intermediate conform on the same machine that we cut the movie on, because of the cost savings of not having a full-blown Avid system, of having an even more expensive storage system. One thing that I'd really like to stress is that filmmaking is about collaboration and constant communication. We need a workflow management tool to keep the communication flowing. And I know, especially in Untitled, Jonathan is from the West Coast and had to frequent the West Coast, but keep on schedule and keep working. So what we had designed for ourselves, we use it every day, is a rough cut approval software. There's 2 major components of this. One is that it's highly secure, and 2, you don't need to be an IT genius to operate it. It works on PC, Mac, and all you need is a web browser. You don't need to download anything. But what it really gave us was to track the amount of scenes. We had executive producer comments on it. We had Jonathan's comments on it. It kept them all condensed together, so you could track what everybody's notes were. You could even put a cue point and put down to the frame, let's make a note about this particular cut. I think one of the most important things that I want to finish up with is that workflow is something that is continuously changing. This had been done, even if it had been done 6 months ago, we could radically tweak this workflow to optimize the dollars for this. There's new technology, and I think that Andy probably wants to introduce Josh into this to kind of show some of the new ideas that we're already thinking of working into other workflows right now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.